Here we are, 2024, midst of a torrential downpour. Little break in the downpour, we'll see what happens. I'm wearing a hat. You can see the water all over the place on the trees and the plants. What I'm interested in today, as it's the first series for 2024, is I'm interested in looking at the reasons that parliamentary democracy is dying. Now, democracy is rule of the people, by the people, for the people, by an engaged public. An engaged public is fundamental to any type of democracy. Now, parliamentary democracy is a specific form of democracy. It's really a very rudimentary form of democracy. It's changed little since it was introduced in the 19th century. And representative democracy, which is parliamentary democracy, is a simple concept. People who've got the right, and again, who has the right to vote in a particular geographical area is determined obviously by legislation. But those people who have the right to vote cast a ballot every 3 to 4 years to elect a representative to make decisions for them over the next 3 to 4 years. And during that period, the individual and even groups have minimal power by which to sway government policy. Now, even in its most rudimentary form, a parliamentary system, parliamentary democracy has advantages over, say, a dictatorship. But the fact is that what we've seen over the past 100 years around the world, including in this country, is the destruction of the idea that voting can radically change things, even introduce reforms. Now, this has occurred for a number of reasons, and these reasons have become much more acute during the deregulation, privatisation, corporatisation, globalisation era, which we've experienced over the past 50 years. So an idea which in its infancy was about transferring power from a hereditary monarch or an oligarchy or a dictator to the people as a whole has been totally subverted. And it's been totally subverted through the domination of most countries' economic, cultural, and even moral and ethical compass by the increasing power of corporate capitalism. Now, capitalism is a simple concept. It's private investment for private profit. But the dilemma is that the logical endpoint of capitalism is the destruction as competition has more and more groups amalgamate and form corporations. Now, currently in 21st century Australia and most of the rest of the world, which relies on the parliamentary system, it is a shrinking number of entities that rely on a parliamentary system. The fact is that the locus of power has been dramatically shifted from the elector who casts a vote to corporations which ultimately determine parliamentary or the legislative agenda of a parliament. And this is highlighted in Australia by the situation we find ourselves in 2024. where we have a small number of corporations not only dominating the economic process but also dominating politics and ensuring that legislation which is introduced into Parliament does not decrease their power, their economic power and their political power. Now, we saw at the beginning of this during the Rudd-Gillard period, where the idea of introducing a super profits tax in the mining sector caused the fall of governments. And we see it every time when political parties wish to introduce reforms to address some of the most pressing problems that exist in this country. Now, ultimately, and we are only 25.5 million people, a drop in the ocean when you look at the 8 billion people which are currently inhabiting planet Earth, a drop in the ocean. We live on a continent, not some God-forsaken little enclave in some backwater. We have extraordinary riches in this country, not just in terms of the people, but in terms of the mineral resources. Just extraordinary riches, beyond counting. And we have over 35,000 registered charities in this country trying to look after the needs of various sections of the population. We've now reached the ridiculous situation where we have private Australian charities raising money to send Australian children to public schools because of the lack of funding and resources in the public education sector. And we have the ridiculous situation of 1.25 million children living in poverty in this country. We have the ridiculous situation where housing has become a investment, a vehicle, and more people are paying extraordinary amounts of their income to keep a roof over their heads, whether it's in rent or mortgage repayments. We have the extraordinary situation where as individuals we're the second most indebted people in the OECD. Just extraordinary figures. Now, if we had a parliamentary system that worked, we wouldn't find ourselves in this situation. So why doesn't Parliament work? Why doesn't it work? It doesn't work for a variety of reasons. One, power has been captured by political parties. Political parties need massive resources to conduct election campaigns, resources which most people have no access to. We have a fourth estate, whether it's virtual legacy, which is used to promote an agenda which reinforces the status quo. Whenever any new ideas are introduced, especially new ideas which may infringe on the profitability of corporations, we see extraordinary reaction in the fourth estate, both the legacy and the virtual. Just extraordinary situation. At the same time, we have a public that's totally disengaged from the political process. We have the creation of what's described as a political class. Many of our representatives are promoted by political parties, and these representatives have gone on they begin their parliamentary career or their push to obtain a winnable seat as soon as they leave education. The ex-Premier, the former Premier of Victoria, is a classical example. When he left university with a very minor degree, He worked as an advisor for a politician and eventually was pre-selected for a safe Labor seat, then worked his way up as Premier. But this is a common story, whether it's the Labor Party or the Liberal Party. It is a very, very common story. We have professional politicians, not people who've got life experiences who are then selected by political parties to represent them. At the same time, we have extraordinary power which is wielded by corporate figures, whether they're family-owned companies or whether they're publicly listed on the stock exchange. Extraordinary profits are being made from our natural resources, just extraordinary profits, and these profits mostly go offshore. And if they don't go offshore, they go into the pockets of shareholders. And the beauty about 2024 is most of you watching this video who are employed are shareholders whether you like it or not. Via your superannuation contributions, you've become enmeshed in the very system that exploits us. I mean, one of the most extraordinarily forward-looking ideas which have been introduced as far as corporate profitability is concerned is to actually blur the division between the worker, whether they're publicly employed or privately employed or self-employed, and the employer, especially if the employer tends to be some large unaccountable corporation. The introduction of social media has not been that democratising force that everybody expected it to be. What's happened with social media is the very instrument which is used to disseminate ideas is owned by a handful of corporations. Some players are state-owned, but most are privately owned. So we see this constant battle going on in society. And people think to themselves, I vote, I elect a representative, but there never seems to be any major change. There never seem to be any major changes. And why is that? Because the legislative agenda which is put into Parliament has little, if anything, to do with the welfare of people. It's about ensuring that those who own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, and that 8% of society that has disposable income that can buy stocks and shares and investment properties, continues to prosper at the expense of everybody else. So people become disillusioned. They think to themselves, what's the point of voting every 3 to 4 years? What's the point of a parliamentary system if that parliamentary system cannot deliver what is required? What is the point of participating? And we create a situation where people look to strong rulers, dictators, oligarchs to control society. Because Parliament as they know it has been proven to be not able to deliver any results. The whole purpose of the reform movement, and to a lesser extent the revolutionary movement in the 19th and early 20th century, was to shift the balance of power. Shift the balance of power from the hands of minority to everyone. We saw the shift of the balance of power. It shifted from hereditary monarchs to unaccountable corporations who through social media have been able to extend their influence on each and every one of us to such a degree that most people are not aware that the impotence of parliamentarians, the impotence of political parties, is directly related to the fact that parliamentary democracy or representative democracy cannot deliver the goods while wealth is concentrated in a small minority. I mean, freedom is not just about political freedom. Freedom is about economic and political freedom. It's about decision-making power and access to wealth. It's all very well being able to cast a ballot every 3 to 4 years to elect representatives who take their direction from the small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. So what we are seeing in 2024 is the demise of parliamentary democracy. We're seeing the demise of parliamentary democracy because wealth is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, and those who have wealth now control the political process. If this wasn't true, why do we have childhood poverty in Australia in 2024? Why do we have 1/3 of the population living a hand-to-mouth existence on social security benefits? Why do we have a housing system which is dominated by investors, so ordinary Australians are now paying anywhere between 30 to 50 to 60% of their income to keep a roof over their heads? Why do we see corporate profits continue to increase? They increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. They've increased as interest rates increase, because the people who have been asked to pay the price for increasing interest rates are you and me, ordinary consumers. We were asked to pay the price for the introduction of goods and services tax in order to keep the system going. So parliamentary democracy has failed. There are alternatives. There are different types of democracy. Democracy, rule of the people, by the people, for the people, by an engaged public, is possible. Direct democracy is a different type of democracy. It's a democracy which is based on delegation, where people make decisions, groups of people make decisions, then appoint delegates or elect delegates to coordinate those decisions at a local, regional and national level. Direct democracy would be one way of countering the power of that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. In a capitalist system which is dominated by corporations, we see the death knell of democracy. Parliamentary democracy, direct democracy, any type of democracy. Political struggle is also an economic struggle. It's not just about power, it's about wealth. It's about how wealth is distributed, how it's produced, how people make decisions. Ultimately, no wonder Australians, as well as other people in parliamentary democracies around the globe, have lost faith in this system of government. They've become disengaged. They've allowed a new political class to dominate the illusion that Parliament has ultimate power. Ultimate power doesn't lie in Parliament. It lies in the boardrooms of unaccountable corporations. The fewer the number of corporations, the more power they're able to exercise to ensure that their profits continue to increase while your life doesn't change. No wonder parliamentary democracy is dying.